Hello, I'm back with another free brush pack. This time it's a cloud brush pack, and I'm going to take you on a paint along today to paint the cover image. These cloud brushes work in Procreate, Photoshop, or Clip Studio Paint, and you can download them by following the link in the description. You can type in 0 to download any of the brushes in my Gumroad store for free, or if you're feeling generous, you're welcome to leave a tip. These brushes, like all of my brushes, are completely royalty-free, which means you can use them freely and without credit in anything you want, including commercial work and things you sell. Let me give you a little bit of information about the brushes first so you can follow along. In the wispy clouds category, we have thinner, more transparent cloud brushes meant to mimic loose, windswept, scattered clouds. There's a pretty big variety of textures within each category here, especially in the wispy clouds, so I recommend you try out each brush for yourself to get a feel for which are your favorites. Next are the fluffy clouds, the cumulus cloud brushes. I included block-in brushes to create organic bases and a bunch of fluffy, detailed texture brushes to mimic real cloud textures in as few brush strokes as possible. A lot of these brushes are geared toward concept art and paintings where the clouds are distant in the image and need to be implied quickly to keep on an industry timeline, but if you want more control out of your cloud shapes, look no further than the watercolor cloud brushes. I made these with real ink and watercolors, then scanned them and used the power of digital brush engines to turn them into these. These were definitely built with Studio Ghibli in mind. I'm a massive fan of how Studio Ghibli paints clouds. I think they're just gorgeous. There are also two cloud edge brushes for those bright sunlit edges. And of course, I included some cloud painting brushes that are geared toward adding texture and a traditionally painted feeling to this digital brush set. Alright, now let's get into the real demo. I'm using one of the painting brushes to block in a rough sketch for the painting. I start with a slanted hill because diagonals feel energetic and organic. I decide I want some creatures walking up over the hill, but I haven't picked out which animals yet. And finally, I block in my clouds. If you've seen my mountain field painting demo, then you might remember that we can imply perspective and depth in our paintings by flattening our shapes by the horizon and opening our shapes up to be fuller and rounder as we move away from the horizon. This pattern happens in the sky too, it's just flipped, with flatter shapes down toward the horizon below and rounder shapes up in the open sky above. As I sketch in my cloud shapes, I'm sketching long, flat clouds down by the horizon that slowly open up to big, fluffy clouds in the open sky. I want my clouds to feel three-dimensional, so I indicate some layers of volume throughout the larger mass of the fluffy cloud shape. I also want to create a feeling of the sky coming forward toward the camera, up above, so I add some streaks of clouds coming across the sky toward the camera in space. Now let's paint. I create a gradient between a darker shade of blue up above and a lighter shade of blue down below. On a new layer, I grab one of my puffy cloud block-in brushes and start to work on the silhouette of the big cloud. I want the shape to feel organic and natural, but I also want my painting to feel balanced and well composed. This means I'll often put marks down, then take note of my gut feeling about the paint stroke that I just put down, and I'll ask myself if each new mark is serving the image as a whole. I will evaluate if each brush stroke feels organic or if it feels too designed, and I'll also take note of how it impacts the overall composition, the balance of shapes in an abstract way. These brushes are designed to automatically mimic the organic, jagged, chaotic edges of real clouds so that you can focus on the larger shapes and forms that you're creating on your canvas. However, we still need to be using the brushes strategically. Clouds tend to feel the most real when they have the right combination of hard and soft edges. We can use all sorts of techniques and textures to harden and soften the edges, including making stylistic, artistic choices, but throughout all these paintings, you can find these patterns of hard edges, particularly along the big puffy surfaces of cumulus clouds, contrasted with softer edges that are bled or blended out. I always keep my clouds on their own layer, so that I can lock that layer later if I want to recolor the cloud or paint inside the silhouette. In this case, I lock my cloud layer and I recolor the clouds to be warmer. I decide I want to create a late afternoon lighting scenario with golden light. Now I use some of the wispy and foggy cloud brushes to create layers of semi-transparent clouds down by the horizon. With my basic cloud shapes all set up, I pick a shadow color and then work on adding a shadow side to my clouds. I use a variety of fluffy cloud brushes to paint in this shadow side, and I'm always keeping in mind where the sun is in the sky. Let's talk about shadow color and clouds. This is an area that is ripe for artistic choices and color exploration. When we look at photos of daytime clouds, we can notice that the shadows are often quite a bit more neutral, grayer than the surrounding sky. Studio Ghibli background artists paint incredible clouds, and they often use this difference in hue to their advantage to create separation, depth, and color variation within the environments. And as artists, we can make experimental choices about how we depict this hue difference. And because light and weather are so varied, we can make a big variety of color combinations feel really real. We can use a primary blue shadow for clouds against a cyan sky, or vice versa, a cyan shadow color against a blue sky. And when we leave the blue family, we can create a lot of information about time of day and weather conditions just from the hue of our cloud's shadows. In this painting, I'm aiming for a more neutral powder blue shadow against a rich sky backdrop. I paint my shadows using a variety of fluffy cloud brushes on a new layer, clipped to the base cloud layer. I'm looking at photos of real clouds so that I can use my mark making to represent the round, puffy forms of the cumulus clouds I'm trying to indicate. I focus on making big, overarching shadow shapes, but then also make sure to leave smaller pockets of light and shadow, which helps make the painting feel more organic and real. Once I create an overall shadow shape that I'm happy with, I lock my shadow layer and then use a slightly darker shadow color to create even more dimension within the shadows. Then I paint in some lighter areas within the shadows. I use a brighter blue to represent the light effect and to create more visual interest in the painting. Next, I go back underneath the shadow layer and add in some variation to the lit sections of the clouds too. Now that I'm at the detailing stage, I vary which brush I'm using a lot. The clouds will feel more organic and more real depending on how varied and unique the edges are. Not just the external perimeter of the cloud, but also the edges between shadowed and lit areas within the cloud. I included so many different brushes in this pack so that you can jump from brush to brush and never feel like your edges are getting too repetitive. We're getting to the stage where I start working from my big shapes down into smaller shapes. I always like to start with the big overarching shapes and forms that define the composition. Then, once those are established, I can take some of the smaller variation-focused brushes and break up the big shapes just enough that the painting feels detailed and real. We don't need to add detail everywhere. In fact, a lot of the time it's better if we don't. We just need to add enough detail and enough variation in key areas of contrast, like right along edges and along shadow and lit divisions, that the rest becomes implied. If you've seen any of my other painting videos, you've heard me repeat this concept before. Our human brains fill in a lot of gaps by making assumptions, and as artists, we can use this strategically. Clouds can have a lot of quiet rest space, as long as the edges and shadow divisions are doing heavy lifting in implying form, detail, and volume. I use a handful of the cloud line and cloud streak brushes to paint in the wispy, distant clouds above the main cloud. These diagonal lines will give the piece more energy and a feeling of perspective and motion. After blocking in shapes with the cloud textured brushes, I grab some of the painting brushes and rakes and give this area of the piece a more hand-painted feeling. Using those same painting brushes and rakes, I do a pass across the full piece, adding in some paint strokes. This isn't a necessary step, and in fact will make the piece look more painted and less real. But that's the beauty of being an artist. I personally really love when my paintings look painted. I want the viewer to envision my artist hand when looking at my work, and adding in little touches like these helps create that feeling. It's also a chance for me to make some more calculated compositional decisions. I rebalance the pockets of light and dark and refine some edges by working from the outside in. I love brush sets that allow me to start with brushes that generate randomness and happy accidents, but then also include brushes that allow finer control and detail work, so I made sure to include plenty of both in this brush set. The area down by the horizon is a really good zone to add both color and shape variation. Atmosphere, light, weather, smog, and fog all sit down by the horizon, and create lots of opportunities to vary the color and the texture of your clouds. I decide to layer some purple tinted clouds in front of my main cloud down in this area. Next, I'm going to block in the hill. I'll be using brushes from my Grass and Fields brush pack, which you can download in my Gumroad store for free. The link is in the description. I decided to use a couple of my windswept grass brushes in this piece. Like always, I create wide, narrow, and flat stripes of grass up by the horizon, or in this case, the top of the hill, and then open up those flat shapes into rounder, fuller shapes using a much larger brush size as the hill rolls toward the camera in space. I end with very visible grass blades right up front by the camera, then block in some wildflowers to add color variation. Next, I clip a layer set to the darken blending mode to the entire hill and create a shadow falling across the hill, which I then reinforce with a multiply layer. I want to create the feeling of the hill being lit vibrantly right at the crest and then tumbling forward into shadow as it comes forward in space. Next, I use a selective color adjustment layer to add in some more warmth to the whites of my cloud, which adds color variation to the scene. You can use a color balance effect if your program doesn't have selective color. I think selective color is a feature that's unique just to Photoshop, but most programs have some sort of color balance effect. I follow this with a levels adjustment to add more contrast, and then I also add some light bloom on the hillside. The last thing I do to the environment is I add a few more mid-ground clouds right by the horizon. Finally, I finish my scene by adding some little Scottish Highland cows, a mom and her baby. If you haven't seen a Scottish Highland cow, you should look up some videos right now. You will not be disappointed. They are some of the most adorable little creatures on the planet. And they also create a nice anchor point for the painting and really bring the balance and color palette together, in my opinion. Before I let you go, I want to shout out that I have a children's book coming out this October. It's a fully illustrated, beautifully printed, 48-page picture book published by Random House Kids based on this viral painting series of mine that you may have seen a few years back. If you have any little ones in your life, or if you just love a classic fantasy story, I'd love it if you checked it out and pre-ordered it if you're interested. I would love to be able to keep making more books in this world, and pre-orders make a huge difference when it comes to the publishing industry. Thanks so much for watching this video today. I hope you enjoyed the demo, and I really hope you enjoy painting clouds with these new brushes.